Faith can be a quiet cry or a roaring storm. I've lived it all. Hello. My name is Emily Carter. I am 28 years old, and my journey with faith has been anything but simple. Growing up in the small town of Ashford, England, I always believed in God. But, like many, I struggled to understand what faith truly meant. For years, my belief felt fragile, full of fear, doubts, and endless questions. I often wondered why some people seemed calm in the fiercest storms while I trembled at the slightest hint of trouble. This story is about how I discovered that faith isn't just one thing. It's a journey with stages, each more profound than the last. It began one chilly autumn evening when life felt overwhelming. I was sitting by the window of my modest flat, watching the rain patter against the glass, feeling lost and exhausted. I'd been praying for months, praying for clarity, for relief, for some sign that everything would be okay. Yet, the silence from above was deafening. I questioned if God even heard me. My faith was shaking, but I clung to one simple truth. I wasn't alone in this struggle. Many before me had walked this path, wrestling with doubt and waiting for answers that seemed slow to come. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that faith isn't a single moment of certainty but a series of steps, like climbing a ladder where each rung brings you closer to God's heart. Some are just beginning their climb, reaching out with trembling hands, while others have learned to stand steady through storms that would shake the strongest of us. And then there are those rare few who have found a deep, abiding peace that doesn't depend on their circumstances. That night, I decided to stop running from my doubts and fears. Instead, I would meet them head-on, cry out honestly to God, and listen. Not for immediate answers, but for the quiet presence I had longed to feel. My journey was about to begin, and I had no idea where it would lead. But I knew one thing for certain. Faith was not about having all the answers. It was about taking the first step, no matter how shaky, toward trust. When I think back to that night in Ashford, I remember the weight of everything pressing down on me. The bills piling up, the uncertainty at work, and the ache of loneliness that seemed endless. My prayers were simple, almost desperate whispers. Please help me, God. It wasn't eloquent or polished, just raw need pouring out from a heart that felt broken. I was in what I later understood as the first stage of faith, the faith that asks. It's a lot like a frightened child reaching out to their parent after a fall, not knowing the right words but knowing they need safety. I remember once hearing a story about a blind man who sat by a busy road, shouting for mercy despite the crowd telling him to be quiet. He kept shouting until Jesus stopped and listened. It gave me hope that even my desperate, messy prayers could reach someone up there. I wasn't alone in my struggle, but that first step of faith is fragile. It's the place where you admit you can't fix things on your own and ask for help. For me, it was a mix of hope and fear, trust and doubt. I prayed for healing, not just physical, but for my weary spirit, and for relief from the storm that seemed to rage in my life. Sometimes I'd feel a flicker of peace, a brief moment where it seemed like God was near. Other times, the silence felt crushing, making me question if I was doing something wrong. Yet I kept coming back. I learned that faith at this stage isn't about perfect prayers or constant certainty. It's about honesty, telling God everything, even when it feels messy. I'd sit quietly after my prayers, not rushing away, letting the stillness fill the room. Those moments became the first signs that my faith was starting to grow roots. It was as if something inside me was shifting. My prayers changed from demands into conversations, from fix this to teach me through this. I began to understand that sometimes God answers prayers right away, but often He waits, not because He doesn't care, but because He wants to build something deeper in us. Waiting became a strange kind of school where I was learning patience and trust. And though my heart often ached, I found comfort in the thought that the God who stopped for the blind man would stop for me too. If you're in that place right now, crying out with raw, imperfect faith, don't be ashamed. It's a beginning, not an end. Reach out like that woman who touched Jesus' cloak, and then stay close. Let the silence become a place where your faith can breathe. Because faith that asks may tremble, but it still reaches out, and that's enough for God to hear you. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself caught between hope and frustration. My prayers remained honest cries, but the answers I longed for didn't come as quickly or as clearly as I wished. The bills were still unpaid, the loneliness still lingered, and the storm inside me hadn't calmed. I began to wonder if God had turned away or if I had done something wrong. The silence felt heavier than before, and my heart wrestled with doubt. It was in this struggle that I discovered the next step on this journey, the faith that trusts. This wasn't about asking for help anymore. It was about believing even when help seemed absent. It was the kind of faith that Abraham showed when he waited decades for a son, holding on to God's promise despite the passing years. It was like standing in a quiet, dark room, knowing that someone is there even when you can't see or hear them. During that season, I learned that faith isn't about pretending everything is okay. Some days, the tears still came, the questions still echoed, but I found a new kind of peace. It was a quiet confidence that God was still at work, even if I couldn't see it. I began to shift my prayers, from demanding answers to simply resting in the knowledge that God's heart is good, even when his hands seem still. I remember one evening sitting at my kitchen table, the rain tapping softly outside, and feeling that strange peace settle over me. I wasn't healed, my problems weren't solved, but I wasn't desperate anymore. I whispered, "If all I have is you, that's enough." It felt like the first time my faith wasn't fueled by what I wanted but by who God is. It was both humbling and freeing. This stage of faith taught me to stop measuring God by my circumstances and start letting his character shape me. I stopped chasing signs and started chasing his presence. I learned that waiting was not rejection but a classroom where faith grows stronger. The silence wasn't absence. It was God's way of building roots deep in my heart. If you're in this place, where prayers seem unanswered and hope feels thin, hold on. You're not alone. Trust isn't about feeling strong all the time. It's about choosing to keep walking even when your heart trembles. Because faith that trusts steadies the soul, even when the storm rages on. Keep resting in him. As time passed, I found myself moving into a place I hadn't expected. A quiet, steady peace that wasn't dependent on answers or miracles. It was a faith that no longer screamed or begged but simply rested. I came to understand this as the faith that abides, a deep-rooted connection with God that feels more like home than a hope for rescue. One morning, sitting by the window of my flat in Ashford, I opened my worn Bible and read the words, "Abide in me and I in you." The image struck me. A branch doesn't try to bear fruit. It simply stays connected to the vine. The life flowing through the vine naturally produces fruit in the branch. It was a moment of clarity. My faith didn't have to be this constant struggle. It could be a quiet, ongoing presence. This abiding faith isn't about striving or performing. It's about living in God's presence every moment, feeling his nearness in the mundane as much as in the moments of crisis. I started noticing small things, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the kindness in a stranger's smile, the calm in a quiet morning. Prayer became less about asking and more about simply being with him. I remember the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying with deep anguish but surrendering his will to the Father's. That's what abiding faith looks like. Not a defeat, but a peaceful alignment with God's plan, even when it's hard to understand. It's trusting that his love holds you steady, no matter what shakes around you. At this stage, my prayers changed again. I no longer needed to know the outcome because I found rest in his sovereignty. I understood that being close to God was the answer I had been seeking all along. It was a faith that didn't panic during storms because it knew the one who calmed the winds. If you've ever met someone who radiates calm amidst chaos, you've seen abiding faith in action. It's quiet but powerful, steady but unshakable. It's not about chasing miracles but living as a living testimony of God's presence. This faith produces peace that doesn't depend on circumstances but flows from a heart deeply rooted in love. Now I see my journey clearly, starting from the raw cries of asking, moving through the steady trust in waiting, and finally resting in the abiding presence of God. But every step was necessary. Every tear, every doubt, every quiet moment prepared me for this peace. And I believe that God wants to lead every one of us there, not to a place of perfection, but to a place of continual communion, where faith is not just a feeling but a way of life. Between each of these stages, I learned there was a challenge I couldn't avoid, the test of waiting. Waiting is that strange season where time seems to stretch endlessly, and the silence feels louder than any answer. It's where promises seem delayed, and prayers bounce back unanswered, leaving you wondering if God has hidden himself away. But I came to understand that waiting isn't a punishment or a sign of absence. It's a preparation, a sacred space where faith is refined and strengthened. During my own waiting, I often felt like I was standing in a vast, empty field under a gray sky, unsure if the sun would ever break through. The worries piled up, the doubts crept in, and sometimes I wanted to give up. But I discovered something remarkable. Waiting reveals the kind of faith we truly have. Some give up, convinced God has forgotten them. Others, like me, learn to hold on tighter, not because of what they see but because of who God is. I found 3 tools that helped me endure those long silent seasons. First, promises, scripture verses that I clung to like lifelines. I learned to say them over and over, letting them sink into my heart, reminding me that God's word never fails. Second, small disciplines, simple acts of faithfulness like short prayers, daily gratitude, and quiet worship. These kept my heart soft and open, even when enthusiasm waned. And third, community. I realized I didn't have to wait alone. Friends who reminded me of God's goodness, who prayed with me, and who refused to let me walk away. I thought of biblical figures like Abraham, who waited 25 years for his son, or Joseph, who spent more than a decade in prison before his dreams came true. Their stories became beacons for me, proof that waiting is never wasted but part of God's perfect timing. Waiting broke my pride, built my patience, and taught me to trust beyond what I could see. If you're in that season of waiting now, feeling the heaviness of silence, know that you are not forgotten. The same God who seemed silent is quietly shaping you, carving deep roots that will hold you steady no matter what comes next. Waiting is not empty. It's the workshop of faith, where your heart learns to beat in rhythm with God's. And when you finally step into the answer, you'll realize the waiting wasn't a delay. It was divine design. I want to share a story, one that changed everything for me. It's about a friend named James, someone whose journey through faith mirrored the very stages I had been learning about. James was the kind of man full of energy and hope, the sort who lit up any room he entered. But one year, everything in his life began to unravel. He lost his job unexpectedly, his savings dried up, and his confidence shattered like glass. What hurt him most wasn't the loss itself. It was the silence that followed. Every night, James would pray fervently, begging God for direction, for a breakthrough, for any sign that things would change. But the silence remained. Each morning, he woke with the same aching question, "Lord, where are you?" At first, James's faith was the kind that asks. He pleaded, fasted, and declared promises over his life. He tried every prayer and every possible solution, but weeks turned into months, and nothing shifted. I remember his apartment, small, cluttered, walls that seemed to listen to his frustration. He once told me, "I feel like I'm shouting at a closed door. There's no sin, no rebellion. Just this ache of waiting and wondering if God has forgotten me." It was heartbreaking, but it was real. That's where so many of us find ourselves, caught between hope and despair. Then something began to change. His prayers grew quieter, less about rescue and more about presence. One night he said to me, "I'm done asking God to fix this. I just want him to be here." That was the moment James stepped from the faith that asks into the faith that trusts. He stopped demanding answers and started resting in the goodness of God he had once only preached about. His circumstances didn't immediately improve, no new job, no magic breakthrough. But peace began to settle over him like a soft blanket. He started thanking God, not for what was changing, but for what remained, his faith, his family, his hope. James told me, "I used to think peace came after the miracle. Now I see peace is what happens when your heart trusts God's hand, even when you don't understand the plan." And then came the next season, the faith that abides. One quiet morning, as he read the Gospel of John, those words struck him deeply. Abide in me. He realized he had been chasing answers instead of resting in Christ. So he began spending his mornings differently, not listing requests, but simply sitting in stillness with an open Bible. Sometimes reading one verse, sometimes saying nothing at all. Slowly, the anxiety that had ruled him faded. James's soul began to breathe again. A few months later, out of nowhere, a job offer came. The company said his name had come up unexpectedly. But by then, he wasn't desperate anymore. He was content. When he told me the news, he smiled and said something I'll never forget. The job isn't the miracle. The miracle already happened inside me. James's journey showed me the power of transformation. It wasn't just about restored circumstances. It was about a rebuilt heart. The man who once begged for quick answers became someone who carried peace into every room he entered. He no longer lived for outcomes. He lived from relationship. The silence that once broke him had become the soil where his soul learned to rest. Looking back on James's journey, I see the 3 stages of faith clearly reflected in his story. He started by asking, his heart driven by need and desperation, reaching out for help like many of us do in times of struggle. Then came the long season of waiting where trust took root. Even when silence stretched on and answers didn't come, he chose to believe in God's goodness, holding on to hope when it seemed impossible. Finally, he arrived at the faith that abides, a deep, peaceful connection with God that didn't depend on changing circumstances but rested firmly in his presence. Maybe your story feels a lot like his. Maybe you've been praying, waiting, and wondering if God really hears you. Maybe hope feels fragile, and the silence feels unbearable. But take heart. Faith doesn't grow in leaps and bounds. It grows slowly, often in the quiet places where we can't see it happening. The absence of answers doesn't mean the absence of God. Sometimes he steps back not to distance himself but to draw you deeper. The greatest miracle isn't always a sudden change in our situation. It's the transformation that happens inside us, the reshaping of our hearts, the quiet strengthening of our souls. When the storms rage outside, and the world feels shaky, faith that has been refined by waiting and trust will hold steady. It's not about having all the answers or seeing the way clearly. It's about living so close to God that his peace becomes your own, no matter what comes. James's story showed me that the most profound victory of faith isn't getting what we prayed for. It's becoming who we were meant to be through the prayers we prayed. It's the quiet strength that rises from the ashes of disappointment and the steady peace that outlasts every storm. Faith is a journey that asks us to keep moving forward, even when the path is unclear. So, which level of faith do you find yourself in right now? Are you still asking, filled with raw need? Are you learning to trust despite the silence? Or have you found a peace that simply abides? Wherever you are, don't stop there. Keep pressing deeper, because God is always calling you closer. Not to test your strength, but to draw you into the heart of his love. And as I write this, I wonder what the next step of this journey will be. There's something waiting beyond even abiding faith. Something deeper, more mysterious. A place where faith and mystery meet, where the silence itself becomes a sacred space. But that's a story for another time. For now, I'm still walking this path, still learning to trust, still reaching out, and somehow that's enough. Faith is not a destination but a journey, and every step forward reshapes who we are. I've come to see it not as a checklist to complete but as a rhythm to live by, a rhythm of asking, trusting, abiding. Each stage has its own beauty and challenge, and God meets us right where we are, never pushing us faster than we can go. He isn't grading our strength or comparing us to others. Instead, he celebrates every small step, every trembling prayer, every quiet moment of surrender. If you find yourself at the beginning, in that place of asking, don't be discouraged by the silence. Your prayers matter even if they feel weak or messy. God hears the cries of your heart and honors your honesty. Stay a little longer after your prayers. Don't rush away. Let the stillness become a space where his peace can begin to grow. It's in these moments that faith takes root, and the journey truly begins. If you're in the waiting, the place where answers seem distant and hope feels fragile. Remember, you're not alone. Waiting is hard, but it's not wasted. It's where faith is refined and trust deepens. Hold on to God's promises, practice small acts of faithfulness, and lean on those who walk alongside you. The silence you face is often God's way of drawing you closer, shaping you into someone stronger and more resilient than you imagined. For those who've reached the place of abiding, the quiet peace that surpasses understanding, your faith is a testimony to others. You carry an unshakable calm that doesn't depend on circumstances, but flows from a deep connection with God. Your life itself becomes a sign of His presence, a living proof that faith is more than belief. It's a way of being. But even as I write this, I can't help but wonder what lies beyond abiding faith. Is there a place where the heart's questions meet divine mystery? Where faith doesn't just rest but dances in the unknown? That thought lingers, a whisper in the silence, inviting me, and maybe you, to keep stepping forward, to keep seeking, to keep believing. So, I ask again, which level of faith are you in today? Wherever you find yourself, don't stop there. Keep reaching, keep trusting, keep abiding. Because faith is never meant to stay still. It's a journey of becoming more like the one who holds us in His hands, who calls us by name, who loves us beyond measure. And the greatest miracle is not what happens outside, but what happens inside. It's the transformation of a heart that learns to rest, to hope, and to believe no matter what. I still remember the first time I truly understood that faith wasn't about instant answers or dramatic miracles. It was a quiet moment, just me sitting in my tiny Ashford kitchen, a mug of lukewarm tea in hand, the evening light fading outside. I had prayed that day, pleading for change, for relief, for a sign. But the silence remained. Instead of feeling defeated, something shifted inside me. I began to listen, not for thunderous answers, but for the faintest whisper of presence. It was as if God was saying, "I'm here, even when you can't see me." That moment marked a turning point. I realized faith isn't about controlling the outcome. It's about trusting the one who holds the outcome. I started to notice the small things, the warmth of a friend's smile, the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the peace that came in the stillness before sleep. These became little miracles, signs of God's presence woven into everyday life. My prayers changed too. They became less about what I wanted and more about who God was in the middle of my waiting. Faith became less of a battle and more of a dance, a rhythm of asking, trusting, and abiding. I learned that it's okay to have doubts, to feel weary, to question. Those moments don't make faith weak. They make it real. God doesn't expect perfection. He desires honesty and a heart willing to keep reaching. Now, when storms come, and they still do, I find myself anchored in that abiding faith. I don't always understand the why or the when, but I know the who. And that is enough. Because faith isn't just about believing God exists. It's about living so closely with Him that His peace becomes our own. So, if you're listening to this and feeling lost, unsure, or worn thin, know that you're not alone. Faith is a journey, and every step you take is part of something greater. Keep asking, keep trusting, keep abiding. The road may be long, the silence may stretch, but God is closer than you think. And as for me, I'm still walking this path, still learning what it means to trust without seeing, to hope without knowing, to abide without end. And I'm inviting you to walk with me, because the journey is far from over. There's still so much more to discover, and I believe the best is yet to come. Faith is a journey I'm still on, and sometimes it surprises me in ways I never expected. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, the air thick with quiet, a thought came to me. What if the silence I feared is actually where God's work is deepest? It struck me that the waiting, the uncertainty, the moments when I felt most abandoned, those were the very times my faith was growing strong roots, hidden beneath the surface. I began to see waiting not as empty time but as fertile ground. Just like a seed buried in dark soil needs patience before it sprouts, my faith needed seasons of silence to take hold and flourish. It was hard to accept at first. I wanted immediate answers, quick fixes, something tangible to hold on to. But slowly, The truth settled in. Growth often happens unseen, and faith is no different. This realization changed everything. Instead of fighting the silence, I started embracing it. I made space to be still, to listen, and to trust that God was at work even when I couldn't feel it. Those quiet moments became sacred. I'd open my Bible and read a single verse slowly, letting its meaning sink deep. Sometimes, I'd whisper a simple prayer and then just sit, letting the peace settle around me like a soft blanket. I also learned the power of community, finding others who understood the struggle of waiting and who could remind me that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels delayed. We shared stories, prayed together, and held each other up when faith wavered. It was a reminder that we aren't meant to walk this path alone. Sometimes, faith grows strongest in the company of others. And so, my journey continues not with certainty, but with trust. I don't know what lies ahead or how long the waiting will last. But I do know this: faith is alive, growing, and drawing me closer to the heart of God. It's a journey marked by small steps, quiet moments, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the path is unclear. If you find yourself in that quiet place of waiting or wondering, I encourage you to stay. Don't rush the process or give up on the journey. Faith isn't about the speed of the miracle. It's about the depth of the trust. And sometimes, the greatest miracle is simply learning to rest in the waiting.